Nice. Well, I am excited to jump into the What's New SOLIDWORKS 2022. This is a very exciting time for Swift Solutions and just the SOLIDWORKS brand in general. Obviously, we had our countdown timer going, and now we're getting into our webinar or our launch event and summary of all the big things coming down the pipeline for SOLIDWORKS 2022. So thank you everyone for joining. No matter where you're located, it's kind of exciting to be able to do this remotely so that everyone can see this content all at the same time. We can engage with each other and question and answers in the chat and just kind of dive into it. One thing that I did want to jump into before we got into the content is just a little bit on Swift Solutions. So Swift Solutions stands for Start with Your Future Today, and really what we want to bring to businesses is the ability to set future-proof solutions and systems in place with SOLIDWORKS. And really what we're talking about specifically is we're focusing on 3D Experience SOLIDWORKS and how some of those tools in the Works portfolio can really be leveraged in your business. And we're excited to fine tune those inside of businesses and really help people understand what tools are available and how it might be able to affect their workflows. So before we get into that, Matt, I just got a quick question for you. What is your favorite time of the year?
Well, I'd have to say it's late November. You got the new SolidWorks features coming out, and then right after you get to eat a whole bunch of good food. So it works out really well to have go straight from all those great new features into a nice nap from your Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, so I know that you are located out in Colorado. We're here in West Michigan. I know the fall colors start to come out, and everyone's taking those color tours. But it's exciting time of the year for the SolidWorks community specifically because there's all these what's new events, and everyone's looking into what the new features are, when they're going to be released, and how it's really going to affect their business and workflow. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. And it's an exciting time. I know I've been a long time SolidWorks user, long time user group leader, as well as just a user of the software. Started a business 8 years ago running SolidWorks for local businesses, helping them fine-tune their process and just being a contract SolidWorks solution provider doing mechanical design work. And yeah, now we're able to do that from the reseller side with Swift Solutions. So again, my name's Stephen Wieringa, and this is Matt. Matt's going to be guiding us into the deep dive today. I'm really excited for the next hour to an hour and a half. There's a ton of content to cover, so I know he's going to be moving through it pretty quickly. But don't be surprised if it gets closer to an hour and a half conversation today, and we'll be in the chat just trying to answer your questions as Matt goes. But if you see anything that's like, oh, that's really neat, I want to go deeper, I really want to dig deep into that. I know both Matt and I are available to jump on calls. We'll put some of our contact information at the end of this conversation, and send us an email or set up a call, and we can really show you that one-on-one. That's where we loved the opportunity to do some of this stuff remote. Just jump on a quick call and show it to you one-on-one and answer your questions, how it might be a fit for your business or affect your process. So yeah, with that, I can kind of turn things over to Matt, and he can jump into it.
Absolutely. We've got a lot to cover. So we're going to start with an on-the-surface view of how SolidWorks 2022 can make you work smarter, work faster, and work together. And then we're going to take a look at a deeper dive of some of the different aspects of the SolidWorks 2022 release and the individual improvements that come with those different aspects. And there's a lot more improvements that are available than we've included in this presentation, but we stripped it down to the ones that we think would be most applicable to a wider audience. We're trying to keep it to a shorter time here, more of a Cliff Notes version, if you will. Then we're going to jump into the some of the newer applications available via the 3DEXPERIENCE Works portfolio that can work directly with SolidWorks to enhance your workflow even further. So let's get started with the on-the-surface look and start with some of the improvements that will help you work smarter. First up, we've got improvements to the hybrid modeling process, allowing you to work with mesh data like you've never have before. Now you're able to actually just use parametric features directly with your mesh data, such as cut extrude, boss extrude, so on and so forth, rather than having to use those Boolean operations. Next up, we have configuration table, where you're actually able to have a table and see all of the features of your configurations and edit those all at once by suppressing or allowing certain components to be available in those assembly configurations. Next up, we have component patterns, and with component patterns, there's been improved intelligence when it comes to using pattern-driven component patterns, and the seed position will be a lot more accurate. And we have a complete rehaul to the interface of the GD&T callouts when you're creating your SOLIDWORKS drawings. So you're going to have a much smoother workflow if you're adding GD&T callouts. We have a completely new stud wizard added in SOLIDWORKS 2022. And with this, you're able to generate external threads to either existing geometry. So if you have a boss there, you can add external threads to that geometry, or you can choose a specific point, choose the size of the stud, and it will actually add the boss and the external threads for you. You can add undercuts, and the graphics for the cosmetic threads have been improved. So you're going to have a better looking model with keeping that lightweight performance. Now let's take a look at some of the improvements that will help you work faster. There are some new shortcut commands added in. With your S key, you now have the command search right in there, and that's going to be awesome for so many people. The S key is definitely a fan favorite. And then with the Q key, that's going to allow you to hide and show your reference geometry, such as any reference planes, so on and so forth. If you've worked with large assemblies and large drawings, you know if everything is always resolved all the time, it can really bog you down. So there's been a lot of improvements over the past few years with large design review mode for large assemblies and detailing mode for drawings with large assemblies or parts. So with this, you can actually go to detailing mode drawing directly from large design review mode without ever having to resolve any of your components, keeping your workflow really nice and quick. With the similar concept here with the sub-assemblies, so you can now directly open up sub-assemblies in large design review mode from the parent assembly that is in large design review mode. Same with a lightweight concept, so you're able to really keep that workflow moving really nice and quickly without having to resolve those components. The quick mate toolbar has a little bit of a tweak here in which you can actually fine-tune your mates before you confirm the mate. So for concentric mates, you can lock that mate before you confirm it. So on and so forth, and that can be toggled a little bit in your system options on how you want that to function. The detailing mode has some improvements in which you can now add hold tables without having to resolve any of your components, and even better, you can add some standard views. So you can just go ahead and add your front, side, and top views without ever having to resolve those components and make your workflow much smoother. And now let's take a look at how SOLIDWORKS 2022 can help you work together. So there's now new options for administrative image types, and this will help you deploy those images remotely more smoothly and allow people to download the installation data directly from SOLIDWORKS rather than having to VPN into your connection and pull it over remotely. With the 3DEXPERIENCE Works portfolio, if you haven't heard of X-Shape, that allows you to use cloud-based in your browser, basically a sculptor type, subdivisional type modeling. Will really enhance your workflow if you work with industrial design type designs, anything with more complex surface geometry. There is now available out-of-the-box cloud data management powered by Anovia tools, and it'll get you up and running with cloud-based data management. So wherever you are, you can be managing your data, and we'll be taking a look at some of these tools in more depth with the workflow towards the end here. We also have introduced compatibility of Simulia-based simulation, which will take you past the capabilities of SOLIDWORKS simulation. So if you're ever hitting any limits with SOLIDWORKS simulation, you now have options to go beyond that. And there's a new licensing option with SOLIDWORKS, 3DEXPERIENCE SOLIDWORKS, that is directly compatible with that cloud-based data management that I just mentioned, and it comes with out-of-the-box platform connectivity, so you're able to get up and running with that data management without having to worry about setting anything up. So now let's take a look at some of the features individually based on the different aspects of the SOLIDWORKS 2022 release. So like I mentioned, there's a lot more updates that have been made this year, but we stripped it down to some of the ones that we think would be more applicable to the wider audience. So we'll start out with the user experience. With the user experience, we talked about the command search in the shortcut bar. With coordinate systems, you can now define their position numerically, and that can be an XYZ coordinate as well as the angle of that coordinate system. We talked about the reference geometry shortcut being now default to the Q key. With the system options, now you have a little information icon next to some of these options that allows you to hover over and get further context on what those settings actually do. With dismissed messages, if you go into your system options and hover over that dismissed message, you'll now be able to see the full message rather than having just the first little snippet of it. With the notification and message bar style, I'll show you what this looks like here on the next slide, but there's been an update to the graphical appearance of that, so your user interface will be a little bit updated from what you're used to. And then with the pack and go, it now gathers references more quickly. So if you have large assemblies that you're doing pack and goes with, those will now be going a lot more quickly. Just to give a little context, this is what the updated notification and message bar style will look like. And over here on the right, we can see that the information icon in the system options, you can hover over that and see what the setting does there. So now let's jump into parts and break that into two sections. Start with hybrid modeling. So as we mentioned earlier, hybrid modeling now will allow you to use your parametric features directly with that mesh data. With the hole wizard, you now have the ability to define the size of that slot in the hole wizard dependent on the arc tangents or the arc centers. So that's going to be a really handy improvement. You can now use bidirectional draft, so you can set that one neutral plane and draft in the both directions rather than having to create two different draft features. Pack and go references, if you're using any kind of master modeling where you're breaking apart the different bodies at the end and saving those off as individual parts, pack and go will now recognize this and pull those bodies into the pack and go. Section plane on an axis, if you've ever tried to section a model or assembly or anything and just tried to guess where the middle of that hole was with your section plane, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You can actually choose the axis of that hole and you can now rotate the section plane about that axis. The stud wizard we talked about and the configuration properties have now been updated, allowing you to go through and edit property for multiple configurations a lot more easily. So jumping into parts and structure systems, once you add your primary structures, you can now add secondary structures even more quickly. You can choose a single point and add multiple secondary members off of that point. With the connection elements, you can now add things such as brackets between two members. And what's even more cool about that is if it has holes, like a bracket with holes, the holes can automatically be added to the members that it's attaching. So it'll make your workflow really clean. The gussets and end caps are now available for structure systems as opposed to just for weldments. You can also now mirror across two planes. So as opposed to having to do two different mirror features, you can now do that in one feature. And if you're ever adding any sheet metal flanges to circular edges, you can now directly edit that edge profile. So jumping into assembly performance, we talked about remaining in large design review mode, and you can now open the detailing mode drawing directly from that large design review mode. Jumping into assembly features. With components in an assembly, sometimes if you're just trying to drag a component around in space, it's a little bit hard to get it accurately, approximately where you want. You can now drag those components with the triad, allowing you to move it in an X, Y to Z direction or rotate it about those planes. Quick Mates control, we talked about the update to that Quick Mates toolbar. We talked about the pattern-driven seed position intelligence being improved. We talked about the configuration tables. And now with the configuration settings, there's a new setting that allows you to automatically exclude that from a BOM. So if you have a configuration of a part that you automatically want to be excluded from the BOM, that is now in the configuration settings. Every assembly you now add it to, it will automatically be excluded, and then you can go in and turn it on if you want. And then this is just there a little, as I mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of configuration you can do with that Quick Mate alignment setting, so you can choose how you want that to appear in your interface. Jumping into the drawings. There's been a decent amount of drawings or updates here. So with detailing mode, we talked about how you can add your standard views and hold tables, and you can open any year's drawings without having those reference parts. So that'll allow you, if you have a orphan drawing, you can open it up and see what's contained in the drawing without having those parts. The circular dimension, if you're adding a circular dimension, you can now quickly toggle between whether you want it to be a radius, a diameter, a linear, within context, so on and so forth, and you can just use tab to choose it before you place it. You have now a symmetric linear diameter, so instead of having the two lines on the opposite side of a diameter that go up with the dimension in between or off to the side, you can now just have that diameter come up one side off the circle and have the diameter symbol. So that'll clean up your drawings quite significantly if you have a really complex drawing. We talked about the GD&T interface being completely revamped. With the BOMs, you can now actually go ahead and add, if you have multiple weldments in an assembly, you can now add all those together into a single assembly BOM. Predefined views, there's been some updates to that allow you to add a sheet metal flat pattern view and trimetric or dimetric views. So if you have those templates with those predefined views set up, you can now have a flat pattern associated with that as well. And you can even control whether or not you want to see the bend lines on that. So with detailing mode, before this new release, it was a system option whether you wanted to save the detailing mode data with your parts. So that would increase your file size, and you didn't get the option to choose for just your large assemblies whether you wanted to save that or not. So now it's a document property. You can go in on an assembly to assembly basis and choose whether you want that data saved. So now your drawings and assemblies, you can keep your file sizes lower by choosing to only save this for your larger assemblies. With the detailing mode, the save time has also been improved. So there's been tests run on various different types of drawings. And as you can see here, A through F, each year or each version of drawing was improved regardless of the test run. And it's from SOLIDWORKS 2021 to SOLIDWORKS 2022 there. So there have been some improvements with the IFC aspect of SOLIDWORKS. So if you're working with plant floor layouts, you're getting IFC files or exporting them. First up, if you're exporting them off, the quality has increased. So anybody you're delivering these files to will have improved quality. And then the import has also been updated to allow you to choose which objects you want to import. So that can speed up your workflow. If you're, instead of having to import all objects within an IFC, you can choose which objects you want. The DXF and DWG output, you can now choose to save that with colors. So that could be really handy in your manufacturing process if you color code certain objects on your DXFs and DWGs. And the import performance in general just has been updated. So now if you're working with parts with a large number of faces or bodies, your import will be much quicker. So there's been updates to graphics with the aspect of lightweight graphics. So if you traditionally, if you opened up something with graphics applied and you're not resolving the point in lightweight, it's in lightweight mode, you wouldn't necessarily see those updated graphics. Now it will automatically recognize if new graphics have been applied, resolve that for you, so you're always seeing the up-to-date graphics. The cosmetic thread feature, as I mentioned, has now been updated to where it's more realistic appearance, allowing you to keep that lightweight feature, but have a better appearance in your model. 3D textures have also been improved, so they're faster and they have more detail. So if you have parts with things such as knurling, you don't actually have to add that geometry and slow your model down. You can just apply 3D textures and keep the realism in your model appearance-wise, but keep a lightweight performance. And then silhouette edges, they're no longer CPU dependent, and the result of that is now your performance will be much smoother when you're panning and rotating around a SOLIDWORKS model by up to 40% increase with frames per second. And we'll just take a look at that here. You can see on the right side we have SOLIDWORKS 2022, and you can see how much smoother that panning around is. So that's really going to be handy. This one's pretty quick. In the administration, we have introduction of a couple new administrative image types. The first one being that remote option that I discussed earlier, in which you're able to allow your remote users to install the files from the SOLIDWORKS download site as opposed to having to pull them from your servers. The other option is a compressed administrative image. It's a little bit easier for with all the files compressed, so it can be copied easier. And there's also been an update that allows you to nest groups. So if you have certain SOLIDWORKS settings that you like to apply and deploy to certain groups, so such as like you have an engineering group, a designer group, they have different programs that you want to install, so on and so forth. You can nest those groups and define those settings per group. Next up, in Visualize, we have a whole new feature that allows you to match the camera perspective, so you're able to define and use the XYZ vanishing points and actually get the perspective of the camera just right for applying it to a 2D background. You also can render only shadows, so you can add plane geometry such as a plane surface or a cube or anything like that, have the shadow render up against that surface, and then have the actual surface itself not be visible in the render. Pattern instance, you can now create patterns rather than having to individually add components multiple times and position them. And that kind of goes into the next improvement, which is the scatter pattern, which, for example, down in that image with the fish there, you could scatter a pattern of multiple components without having to randomly add those and move those around yourself. And if you're doing animations in SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional, you can now group multiple keyframes, keeping your timeline a little bit cleaner, and also allowing you to edit those keyframes simultaneously by moving them all at once, adjusting the timing, so on and so forth. And there's also the availability to switch cameras with keyframes now. So instead of having to render out each different camera view and then clip those together in a secondary software, you can do keyframes to switch the cameras automatically throughout the animation and have it all be one single streamlined video. And then there's been some updates to the output viewer that will give you enhanced details as the render is taking place and give you better previews as well. Now, with the corner radius, if you didn't know about that feature, it allows you to apply a default small corner radius to any sharp edges because we know realistically there is no truly perfectly sharp edge in this world. So it just adds that much more realism, which can make or break your renderings. Before, you could only choose to have your bitmap or the default radius applied, and you wouldn't be able to have them both. So now you can choose to have both the bitmap or the bump map and the corner radius. I apologize, bump map. And then we have the cosmetic threads not only improved in the SOLIDWORKS interface, those now automatically come over into SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So you're going to have increased realism there as well. And then we have support for multiple motion studies. So if you're setting up explode animations or motion studies in SOLIDWORKS, you can bring all of those over into animations into SOLIDWORKS Visualize. When it comes to routing in SOLIDWORKS 2022, you can now create C points directly in SOLIDWORKS interface without having to launch the routing library manager. So that'll just keep you that much more streamlined in your process. There's also now support for backshells, so you can actually just have the backshell inserted into your route and the harness go right through your backshell, making sure that your wire isn't going to have any crimping or anything like that. And then the flattened route also supports that backshell integration that's new. The cable points are also available to create directly in the SOLIDWORKS interface without having to open up your routing library manager. And there's been increased performance with the bend radius during route creation. So it'll give you a little bit more of a realistic routing performance there. There's also been some improvements when it comes to external connectors. So with the flattened drawing aspect of external connectors, you're able to have the connection and connector tables in there. You're able to better document all of those external connectors in your flattened views in your SOLIDWORKS drawings. You also have a little bit more control when you're editing those flattened routes with on-screen manipulators and flyout menus as you're editing those. Last up, we have improvements to simulation. We have a whole new virtual connector, and that's the linkage rod. So you're able to actually choose from various different cross sections. You're able to apply the different materials and dimensions to those cross sections, and it'll allow you to solve for shear, axial, and bending loads. You now have a default mesh of the blended curvature-based mesher. So this will give you a little bit of a nice balance between speed and accuracy with the blended curvature-based mesher. And it gives you a little bit of control, more control than previously allowed by allowing you to coarsen or refine the mesh outside of the global range. And just in general, there has been an improved performance by solve times being reduced up to 30% with SOLIDWORKS Simulation 2022. With the frequency, buckling, and nonlinear simulation types, you now have an automatic solver selection, so that'll make it that much more accessible to those who are not simulation experts. And you also, last but not least, you have the beam shear factor calculation improvements that now consider the beam's material and section shape. So that's it for the deeper dive. As I mentioned, there's a lot more improvements, but we just had to clip notes this down because we're trying to keep it to a relatively short time here. Now, if you saw anything that you want to see individually how it works, you want to just get a video, jump on a call, see how it works with one-on-one, we'll be happy to take care of that. So we'll be giving contact information at the end of this webinar. Feel free to follow up and we'll take care of you. So jumping into the 3DEXPERIENCE Works deepest capabilities, we'll be taking a look at that cloud-based sculpting a little bit, the cloud data management that's out of the box, and simulation beyond the capabilities of SOLIDWORKS simulation today. And we'll be taking a look at the UBOWorks Nemo submersible. So let's go ahead and get started with the cloud-based sculpting. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go into full screen so you can see a little bit more screen real estate, and we'll jump right in. All right, so let's take a look at some cloud-based sculpting with the 3D Sculptor role on 3DEXPERIENCE. The app inside of this is called XShape. When it comes to product design, you really have to focus on innovation to keep ahead of your competition. This requires you to be creative, agile, and make sure that you're churning out these innovations quickly to stay ahead of the competition. So with parametric surface modeling, traditional parametric surface modeling, you are able to be creative, you're able to be agile. However, it's very time consuming. It takes a lot of training and knowledge and a lot of planning as you're making your product, so that as you're making any changes down the road, it's not going to ruin your product. So with subdivisional modeling, you're able to be really spontaneous. It's really quick to onboard someone, much faster than traditional parametric surface modeling. And you're able to see changes in real time and conceptualize things much more quickly. So we're going to take a look at how XShape can help you conceptualize in 3D. You're going to jump into seeing how that can collaborate with a SOLIDWORKS user and then take it to even a final production product. So we'll be following Dan the designer and Don the engineer, who are going to be working on the shell of the Nemo submersible. So let's start with conceptualizing it in 3D, and we'll jump in with Dan here and the 3D Sculptor role on 3DEXPERIENCE. This is in a web browser, so you can use this even on a touchscreen device, tablets, anywhere that you have an internet connection and a web browser. So we have the internals of the Nemo submersible here, and we can see that this is a SOLIDWORKS component here, but we can build around that SOLIDWORKS geometry that already exists. So we can go ahead and see all of the individual components that are associated with it. And we also have some reference sketches available here that we'll go ahead and show as well. Next up, we have the option to insert a primitive, and this is basically a virtual hunk of clay, and you can choose an approximate shape that you'd like to start with. And we'll go ahead and add a box here. Once we add the box, we can see that there is a number of lines across this, and this is why it's called subdivisional modeling, is it actually takes your geometry and divides it up into multiple different surfaces. And you can choose the refinement as you're entering it in on how refined you want that mesh to begin with. Generally, the fewer subdivisions you have to begin with, the better, and you can always add more for detail later. So the manipulator itself is called the robot, and we're able to actually move that, and this will actually control how the geometry is being affected. So in our case, we want to scale this back. So now that this is on the left edge, it will scale from the center point of that robot, and we'll scale this backwards. As a default, all of the geometry is a C2 surface continuity. So we're able to go ahead and use some intelligence here when selecting face loops and face edges, and actually crease edges to make them a sharp edge as opposed to that C2 level surface continuity. And you can go ahead and use the slider to control how sharp that crease is, or add filleted edges to that sharp edge to soften it just a little bit. And you can see here that the edges themselves actually have a color context on those edges are now filleted creased edges. When working with touchscreens especially, or if you're really good with a mouse and you can draw a good, nice, smooth curve here, you can actually draw a curve that you want all of your vertices to align to get a really quick update on your geometry. You can then start tweaking using the robot manipulator, and we'll go ahead and move this geometry into place of one of the sides here of the Nemo submersible shell and start tweaking it further. Now you can actually move the robot and attach it to different lines as well, and this will actually allow you to have the axes of this robot along that line's orientation. So now you can just shift the points along that line. And you can use the ruler here to get a little bit more of a precise adjustment as you're tweaking your tweaking your positions. So now, once you have your base geometry, as I said, you can add more face loops, edge loops for more control. However, if you want more geometry, you can also extrude geometry, and it basically adds another virtual hunk of clay, and then we can start shifting this over. And we're going to drag this over the center plane because we're going to go ahead and add symmetry. You can choose a plane for symmetry, and this will be a dynamic symmetry, so that as we're changing things on one side, you'll see it update on the other side, even after the symmetry has been applied. And then you can turn that off whenever you're ready to stop that symmetry condition. Now we want to have this be a flat top on the Nemo submersible, so we can go ahead and align all these entities by a line and make sure that line is horizontal. And then we'll go ahead and scale this in to follow the front profile here. Now, as I mentioned, we can insert more loops later, and that's what we're going to do here. Is we want to have that cutout through the back of it here, so we want to have some loops around that we can control, as well as add a little bit more control to the design itself. So we'll go ahead and tweak this a bit further to get that little swoop on the front top edge here. And then we'll go ahead and add some edge loops that are vertical orientation as well to give us that control around the cutout, as well as the ability to add this swoop at the bottom. Now we're going to go ahead and select edges on opposite sides here, and we're going to use the extrude command again. What happens when you have edges or faces on the opposite side selected is it will actually cut extrude through the geometry. And since we have the symmetry condition on, we now have that cut through both sides and a nice cut through the back. So jumping into SOLIDWORKS, we're able to actually pull this geometry into SOLIDWORKS. But first, we're going to go ahead and add some new components in SOLIDWORKS. This is actually the 3DEXPERIENCE data management add-in. We'll be diving into this next. But just a quick view, you're able to see all of your components, your feature tree here, and reserve components. This prevents anybody from your team from saving over you as you're working on it. And then we'll go ahead and search our library of components and add the thrusters as well as the top hatch. So once that's added in, you can go ahead back to your data management add-in and save that to your cloud storage. Now everyone has access to the most recent version, and they can update it in their session and start making tweaks to it as well. So in addition to the thrusters and the top hatch there, we're going to want to add that shell that was just created in X-shape. And you can just search it just like we did with the other components and add it right into your SOLIDWORKS assembly. Once that's made it into place, we can go ahead and make that a little bit transparent to see how it fits around everything. Now, we're able to take this and actually apply downstream features in SOLIDWORKS, such as shelling it out, adding cuts and everything. But we want to add a couple notes so that we can jump back into X-shape and make any updates. In our case, we want to have holes for those thrusters, and we want to have the geometry aligned to that top hatch as well. Before we do that, we do add a couple of, as I mentioned, downstream features. So we shell this out a little bit and add some cuts. So jumping back into the X-shape environment, we've now taken the geometry, created it conceptually in X-shape, brought it into SOLIDWORKS, added some refinement notes and downstream features in SOLIDWORKS, and now we'll jump back into X-shape. So from the 3DEXPERIENCE platform right in your browser, we get a notification that there's been a post made and been tagged in a comment here, and we can see the image that was just created with the markups. Give feedback that we're going to jump on that update and refresh the session. And what that will do is it will pull in those updates that were just made in SOLIDWORKS, because those were saved to your cloud storage. So now we can see all of those thrusters and hatch components added into this assembly. So now we can design in context around those properly. So we'll jump back into the subdivision model here, and we'll add a geometrical set which will allow us to kind of organize our feature tree here. And we're going to actually convert the entities on this top hatch so we know exactly where we're going to have to align that geometry to around that top hatch. So jumping back into the subdivision model, instead of adding loops all the time to increase the control you have, you can also subdivide the faces further to give you a little bit more control. In our case, we want to crease the edges around this because we're going to align this geometry to the top hatch. We'll select that loop there and also select the loop that we converted from the entities of the top hatch and align to curve. And that will just pull that geometry directly around that converted entity that we had. Now there's in the background, this is all C2 level surface continuity, but if we show the cage itself, we can see a little bit more of what's happening in the background here. In our case, we want that front edge to be all aligned with each other in a nice straight line, so we can go ahead and select all of these vertices and use the align by line, or align the vertices to each other in a line. So now we have that nice straight front edge. We can also do that with faces, similar to how SOLIDWORKS mates work. You can actually select a number of faces and have those coincident to each other, and that creates a nice flat planar surface. So now we can go in and start tweaking this a little bit further to give the orientation that we want. We can move that robot down so that as we rotate it, it rotates about that point now, and we can rotate this whole face up a little bit. And we can do the same thing by applying the robot along a face. And now as we're dragging along that face, everything is moving along that plane, and we're not losing that coincident relationship. And we'll go ahead and make a few final tweaks here with the geometry itself. So next up, we're going to make the cutouts for the thrusters themselves. So we'll add a couple more geometrical sets. And what we're going to do is a Boolean operation in which we create geometry where we want the cuts to be and subtract that geometry out. So we'll go ahead and add a cylinder in and start positioning that around the vertical thruster where that pathway of the water will be flowing. And we'll jump ahead here. We created the horizontal thruster as well. That's in a different geometrical set. And we'll go ahead and use the traditional SOLIDWORKS workflow of a combine command, which will allow you to subtract that geometry from the base geometry of the shell. So now we see we have those nice lofty cuts that would be really difficult to achieve in parametric modeling, especially when it comes to updating that geometry. It becomes even more complex. In our case, we want this cutout to flow a little bit closer to the bottom of the horizontal thruster cutout. So we're going to go ahead and tweak that. And what we can do is we can just jump back into that subdivision model for this vertical thruster. And even though that was created before the horizontal thruster, since the use of geometrical sets, we're able to still see that horizontal thruster in the background, so we can get a good idea of where this is actually going to fall once we complete the command. So now that we've made that adjustment, we can go ahead and confirm, and we can see that that cut is now a little bit further down, just like we want it. So we'll go ahead and jump right back into SOLIDWORKS. And when you open this up in SOLIDWORKS, those downstream features will update and all the geometry will update as well. And we can see here that we used a little bit of a master modeling technique where we broke it out into individual components. And you can now save those off as individual parts, add downstream features even further. So you can actually take this from a conceptualization in 3D, you can collaborate with SOLIDWORKS users, and you can even make it a final production concept with 3D Sculptor roll-on 3DEXPERIENCE. So it's a really cool technology that wasn't available before for SOLIDWORKS users. So now you can expand your SOLIDWORKS workflow by including 3D Sculptor and creating components that weren't possible before. All right, so now that we've taken a look at some cloud-based sculpting, let's take a look at some cloud data management. The cloud data management tools available with 3DEXPERIENCE are powered by Inovia. And when it comes to managing your SOLIDWORKS data, that can be really difficult because all of the parts and assemblies and drawings generally reference each other. And so when it comes to generic consumer cloud storage apps such as Dropbox, it just doesn't understand these references and can be really tricky to work with others as well. And then when it comes to setting up traditional systems like SOLIDWORKS PDM, it can be really expensive up front because you have to worry about all the server and the infrastructure, server management and the infrastructure, and you have to worry ongoing about keeping that server updated. Now, another option is connecting the 3DEXPERIENCE platform to your SOLIDWORKS. So this will allow you to have out-of-the-box cloud data management functionality with Inovia-powered tools. So let's take a look at Eric the engineer and Debbie the designer as they work and finishing up the hatch design for the Nemo submersible, and we'll take a look at how we can store data, manage changes, and design concurrently using the data management tools available with 3DEXPERIENCE. So starting out with Eric the engineer, we'll jump in as he is wrapping up some changes on the main assembly of the hatch and adding in some toolbox components. Once we add in these toolbox components, we can go ahead and also open up the drawing for the hatch assembly and make sure that those changes are appearing in the drawing. Now we can open up the 3DEXPERIENCE add-in here, and this is actually where we can access all of our cloud-based data management tools, and we can actually see the context of whether they've been saved or they need to be saved up to your cloud storage. As for the toolbox components, those are automatically saved up to your cloud storage and set to a release state, meaning that you don't have to worry about anybody accidentally making changes to your shared database of toolbox components. Once we go ahead and move forward with saving the drawing, we'll go ahead and open up the Save dialog window where we can see all the reference components that need saving as well. We can also choose a bookmark, and this would be similar to choosing a folder in a traditional Windows File Explorer system. Once we save, it will go ahead and only save the ones that have had changes made to them. So this makes efficient use of your bandwidth. Now we can see the updated status of all those components are properly saved to your cloud storage. Now that this design has been completed, Eric has approved this for production, and we can go ahead and open up our maturity graph right within this add-in pane as well. Choose to include all structural objects and related components, and release all of the components to be released for production. And we can jump in and release these drawings that we had saved to our bookmark as well. And once we release that, now no changes can be made to it until a new revision is created, locking any accidental changes from happening. We can also add non-SOLIDWORKS documentation as well, such as PDFs. And once you add these will also be revision controlled. And you can even preview these components right within this add-in pane. So to wrap up, Eric has some sub-assemblies that were not originally added to your cloud storage. So we're going to go ahead and add these folder structures of different components and do a batch upload rather than uploading them and importing them one at a time. And that makes quick use of importing projects that weren't originally created with your cloud storage. So that provides even further out-of-the-box functionality to get people up and running quickly. Now, taking a look at Debbie the designer and managing some changes. We'll go ahead and sign in to our access to our cloud data management tools, and we'll get a chat here from Eric that the hand wheel needs some updates. So we'll go ahead and search all of our data, and we see there's a couple different components, so we can actually preview that right here and make sure that we're looking at the right component. And we can also jump into the comments, see that we want to go forward with the design inspired by a racing wheel. So we'll give some confirmation. We're going to jump in on that, and then we can actually add some annotations directly within this preview to kind of brainstorm on how we're going to go about these updates. So we're going to go ahead and remove some material from the side, and then with the remaining structure, we're going to give it a little bit more of a swoopy feel here. Now we can go ahead and directly open it. And last thing we want to do here before getting started on those updates is see how it's going to affect anything upstream or downstream. So we can jump into the relations and see any parents that are associated with this. And then in this case, we see that it's part of the subassembly, which is then part of the main assembly for the hatch, which has its associated drawing as well. But we want to go ahead and open up the subassembly as well because it was released data, and to make any changes to it, we will need to create a new revision. So we'll select the two components, the subassembly and the individual component that we want to update, and we're going to go ahead and create a new revision. Once a new revision is created, you'll see that it still says revision A there, but we have context that it's not the latest revision. So we can go ahead and replace the current revision with the latest revision in our session, and we now see that we have revision B for the subassembly and the component that we want to make updates to. So we can go ahead and reserve these components, and by reserving it, now we know that nobody can actually save over anything while you're working on it. Now that the change has been made, we can go ahead and open up the drawing. And by opening up the drawing, we can see that the geometry is updated on the drawing. We can add any new annotations that we need to, and also save those changes up as well. We can also create a new revision directly from the Save dialog window if it hasn't been created prior to making the changes. So we'll go ahead and set these to a frozen state, and by setting it to a frozen state, we're making sure that nobody saves any changes to it while it's under review. And then we'll wrap up by adding some latches to the hand wheel here, and we'll go ahead and save those changes up to our cloud storage as well. And now everyone will have access to all of the data, and we can automatically release that reservation as we're saving to make sure that anybody else can jump in, reserve it, and make changes as needed. So lastly, we'll take a look at how it can help you design concurrently. So we have Debbie, who was working on the wheel assembly, but the whole time that she was working on the wheel assembly, Eric had that main assembly, and Eric can actually see that Debbie has those individual components reserved. But since Eric is only working on the top level assembly and making changes on that level, he can go ahead and reserve that individually, and then we can jump out, and we need to update the session since the hand wheel has been updated. We get a context or a chat from Debbie saying that update has been made. We need to update our session to reflect that. So what we can do is reload that from the cloud storage. And now we see the updated hand wheel in our session as well. So we can go ahead and open up the drawing to review to make sure that all of those changes have been properly implemented before releasing that data. And after the review has been made, we can just open up that maturity state workflow and set these to release as well for production. We'll go ahead and wrap up our portion of the design by adding some linkage rod connectors. And we'll go ahead and open up the associated drawings, make those updates, and save all of those changes as well. In terms of non-SOLIDWORKS files, you can update those by uploading new versions that have been made locally. And once those have been updated, you can always go ahead and preview those updates to make sure that the right version has been saved up. So with this, we saw how we can store data, manage changes, and design concurrently. And this isn't just for SOLIDWORKS users. Everyone in an organization can benefit from proper data management practices, and this can go even further into change actions and more. So this is just the beginning of how you can manage your data with the Innovia tools on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. Alrighty, let's wrap up today by taking a look at simulation without limits. When it comes to simulation, there's a chance that you're going to need to test multiple different variations of your product. You're going to need to check the cycle and see the durability of your product, and ultimately check for material failure as well. There are a number of different physics that you can be simulating for. You've got fluid dynamics, physical product simulation, so on and so forth. So collecting all of this simulation data can be a really time-consuming task. If your tools are disconnected, that collection of data can be even more daunting. But there is an option with the 3DEXPERIENCE solutions that will allow you to work directly with multiple physics, and you can test your physics, fluids, plastics, and more. Best of all, it connects directly with SOLIDWORKS, allowing you to design your data in SOLIDWORKS and run your simulations and keep all of that in context. So if you make updates in SOLIDWORKS, you can pull that right into your simulation without having to set everything up from scratch. So we'll follow along with Adam Analyst as he runs some simulations on the battery compartment as well as the skid for the Nemo submersible. We'll jump into some design exploration and how you can check out different variations of a design, check out how to check for the durability and life of a design, as well as taking a look into worst case scenario and material failure for a design. So starting out with the design exploration, we're going to start by taking a look at the battery compartment, which has concerns as it goes deep underwater. The pressure on the outside of the compartment can cause failure potentially. So we want to test for that and make sure that we have appropriate design for that constraint. So we'll go ahead and choose the variables that we think can be modified that will allow for the desired outcomes. In our case, we want to check for the thickness of the shell as well as the thickness of the stiffeners. So as we add these as parameters, we can now go ahead and save this up to our cloud storage, and then go ahead and open this directly into the simulation-based apps right from SOLIDWORKS. So once this opens up, first thing is we're going to want to create a mesh, and we can go ahead and use a bit of automation here. So we can choose a mid-surface mesh, and this will recognize all the thin components, create mid-surfaces on those thin components, and at the same time create the associated shell mesh bodies. So now we are going to go ahead and open up the mechanical scenario creation, and this is where you add your associated steps, your restraints, and then all of your associated forces. So in our case, we want to have the pressure on the outside of the shell pushing in, and this pressure is associated to the pressure at the desired depth. So once you run this simulation, we get to see the results here right in your window, and we are able to simulate the results as that load is applied. At first glance, we see that it is over-designed, so we're going to go ahead and explore some different alternatives. With the parametric design study, you're able to apply different variables and set a goal target that you want it to achieve, and rapidly iterate designs and test different options. So here we can see the multiple different iterations of this design that were tested, and we can take a look and zoom in on some of them and see the individual factors and results that came with them, and even filter out by the best versus feasible options. In our case, we want to take the best option and make some downstream changes to it, so we're going to go ahead and generate an alternative for that design and make the changes to that alternative. Next up, we'll take a look at the durability aspect of the Nemo submersible. So the battery compartment will be experiencing that pressure over and over again, so we want to check the life of that. And then we also want to simulate for the skid on the bottom of that compartment. So we're going to set up an explicit dynamic step in which the impact is complex, so we have that complex solver to take care of it as it's being put in storage. We'll go ahead and add an initial velocity, and then go ahead and add gravity so we can just simulate that falling and hitting that surface below it. We can set up general contact, so we don't even have to apply individual contacts. The solver will automatically take care of anything that comes in contact with another object. So once we have that all set up, we can run that solve as well. And in this case, we want to set up a cloud run, and this allows you to send to a cloud-based solver and use as much up to 144 cores, greatly reducing your solve times. So here we can see those results, and it's within expected ranges of that material, but we do still want to test for the durability, because this can happen over and over again, and over time it could wear out and fail. So we can set up a fatigue loading case, and then with that, we can choose whether we want to include just the last increment or all increments for the case. And in the case of the explicit dynamics, we'll include all increments because there's a lot of small contacts there and fluctuations as that load case was simulated. So we can also choose whether or not to include just stress, just strain, or both. And in this case, we'll include both of them to improve the accuracy for both the high and low cycle fatigue. In our case, we're only worried about one event happening at a time. The skid plate will only be in contact with any surfaces as it's being put in storage, and the pressure is only going to be applied when the submersible is deep underwater. So we're not worried about inter-event transitions, but you do have the availability to test for the fatigue of multiple events happening at the same time. So we can wrap up by defining a surface finish, and then running the simulation and checking out the results. And we're able to see the log of life here, and even share this in a lightweight view on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. This is accessible within any browser, so you can share this with your team, and they don't even need the simulation software. So it's a great way to reduce on the report times. You're able to just share them direct with data results. So we'll wrap up simulation without limits by taking a look at the worst case scenario. So with the worst case scenario, we can actually take the case that we already set up and duplicate that so we don't have to set up everything from scratch. Then we can go ahead and add a Rix buckling step, and this is great for any unstable and non-linear behavior in materials for failure. And now we can get a good visualization in 3D of where that failure can be expected. We can also go ahead and create an XY plot to better visualize which areas of this compartment for the batteries will fail first. This can also be shared on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, meaning that anybody that has access to the platform and your data can then access these results without having to have the simulation software themselves. And even if it's yourself reviewing this, you now have it on the go wherever you go with even a phone. You can jump on and take a look at these results. So with simulation, we can check for multiple different iterations of a product rapidly. We can check how long that product is expected to last and where it's expected to fail if it does fail. So that was a look at all of the newer capabilities available with the 3DEXPERIENCE Works portfolio and how those can work really powerfully together with SOLIDWORKS, bringing you possibilities that weren't available before. So what you can expect next is a follow-up email with some summary information and a link to this replay. So if you want to watch it again and catch anything that you missed the first time, feel free to rewatch. And then if you have any further questions, please feel free to call or email with any questions you have on any SOLIDWORKS or 3DEXPERIENCE solutions. And I know we had to go through things really quickly today to try to keep it as short as possible, but if you saw any feature that you would actually like to see demonstrated or go more in depth on how it could be a benefit to your organization, please feel free to call or email. Or you can always head to our website and fill out the contact form there as well. Let's check back in with Stephen and see what he thought. Alrighty, welcome back, Stephen. What'd you think?
Hey,
what was your favorite
man,
feature?
Holy cow, Matt. Wow, there's a lot of new features coming through in 2022, not only with SolidWorks, but we're talking simulation. I mean, I have my notes here. It's a pile of new features that I'm going to be going back to the team and talking through how we're going to be able to implement it in some of our customers' workflows. So thank you again for that overview, and excited to get calls and talk through some deeper dives into some of these specific features over the next few weeks with our customers. Some of the big things that stood out to me, I mean, that last demo that you did with X-Shape and some of the different features that you showed there, that's just impressive. I'm excited to see customers that aren't even using that tool, how they're, that just kind of clicked with them of how they're going to be able to use that in their workflow and their process going forward. In addition, that's going to be in addition to their current SolidWorks workflow. It's obviously not going to be replacing some of it, but in addition to. So I'm excited to take these notes and talk to some of our customers offline. Thanks again, Matt. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone, like we mentioned earlier, if anyone wants to see anything more in a deep dive, feel free to give us a call, email. We're happy to get you some more information or give you a one-on-one demo there. So thanks for joining and have a good day.
Thank you.